Hey guys, welcome back to the MLS Updater with me, Mike Rice. Today we're going back to the LA Galaxy, and I'm delighted to have Alex Ruiz with me once again. Alex, how are you?
I'm good, Mike. How are you?
Really good, thanks. Really good. Enjoying the summer down here and the off season, and MLS is only sort of 2.5 weeks away now, isn't it? So,
Yeah,
how's it all
18,
been
19
going for
days.
you? Yeah, how's preseason and everything going for you guys covering LA Galaxy?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a lot to cover and a lot to talk about when it
Yeah.
comes to the LA Galaxy. So there's definitely no shortage of news. I think right now, we're about to head into the Coachella Valley Invitational. So there'll be a couple more games. We'll see what Greg Vanny does, how he, uses the roster with the players he currently has, and kind of go on from there with almost less than 3 weeks before the first game of the season.
Excellent. Then before we dive in, can you remind everyone sort of where they can find your work as we're building up to this season opener?
Yeah, so I'm the LA Galaxy beat writer for thestriker.com. You can find me on Twitter at ALXRUIZ15. I tweet a lot about the LA Galaxy, look up their stats. I'm a very analytical person. I'm the type of writer, who if you read my stuff, you'll just read a lot of numbers. I'll do my best to correlate things and kind of break down and analyze what's going on with the team. And I'm really looking forward to this upcoming season, being able to do it for one whole year. Last season, I joined the striker around the midway point of the year, so
Oh,
really
okay.
excited to, get turning and get working.
Yeah, definitely. Excellent. So yeah, we're obviously moving into you're going up to Coachella, obviously coming up for these preseason games, and Araujo, I guess will be the starting point. Is still going to be there. The issues with this move to Barcelona that fell apart just with seconds of delay, it seems. How does that feel for the club going forward and for the player itself, do you think?
Yeah, I think it's definitely got to be, from a Julian Araujo perspective, got to be gut punching because
Mm.
getting a move like Barcelona doesn't come very often. And Greg Vanny, when we talked to him last week, he told us that this wasn't the first time Barcelona were calling for Julian Araujo. They called last summer. They were interested in him, but this I think we're the winter. This winter, they really picked up their interest. They were like, okay, we're gonna sell Hector Bellerin, who was one of the backup right backs at Barcelona,
Mm.
and they sold him. And then Julian Araujo was on top of their replacement list. And this is all done on transfer deadline day. We know how hectic that can be in the
Yeah.
world of football. And I think being able to do try to make a move, try to figure out how much you're going to sign him for. Originally, it was reported it was going to be a loan with a 7+ million option to buy, and then the deal changed to straight up $4 million sale. So I think that kind of played an impact of when the transfer was submitted. But yeah, multiple reports saying it was 18 seconds late because
Yeah.
of a computer error from Barcelona's side. Greg Vanny made sure to mention that it was Barcelona, the ones who kind of not really, like, I guess, messed up. They were the ones who turned in the paperwork late, and because of that, this transfer was in a bit of a limbo. And then a couple days ago, we had FIFA say that the transfer of Julian Rajo to Barcelona will not go through per FIFA. They were the ones that ruled on it, and they decided, no, we're not going to let this pass.
Yeah, it's sad for the players, you say, and it looked obviously LA Galaxy looked like they were doing what they could for him. We'll have to see what happens come sort of the summer transfer window and the end of the season in Europe. We have to see if something comes up for him again, I guess, and what Barcelona what their sort of plans are going forward. Before we dive into the rest of the sort of the on pitch sort of discussion, let's revisit some of the issues that have been happening off the field. Obviously, the penalty that LA Galaxy have been issued with the rule breaking with the Christian Pavon signing and the contracts situation with him previously. There's a lot of fan protests, boycotting vows over Chris Klein's contract extension, with him being currently suspended. Can you give us a little bit more of just a brief overview of what's been going on and where we're sort of at the moment with that?
Yeah. So to recap about, the LA Galaxy getting sanctioned, back in 2019 when they originally signed Christian Pavon on loan from Boca Juniors, he was getting undisclosed payments that were not,
Mm.
recorded, and because of that, the Galaxy were essentially playing with four designated players. They had Ola Kamara at the time. They had Roman Alessandrini and Gio dos Santos. Those were the DPs, if I'm correct. Um, and they were and they were like, okay, we can't sign him to max tam. He wants a little bit more money, and because it's a loan situation, you
Mm.
kind of have to find a way to bend the rules a little bit. And I guess that was one of the reasons why that they were like, okay, we're gonna give Pavone these payments. The league didn't know about it because of that. He's getting more money than it was originally recorded. He would become a DP the next year, but for the 6 months he was in LA in the 2019 season, yeah, he was supposed to be a DP, but they
Yeah.
never registered him as that. And once the league found out, they put sanctions on the Galaxy. They took $1 million of general allocation money. They also told them that they are not allowed to sign international players that required ITEC to get into the country
Mm.
during those secondary window, which is basically the summer transfer window.
Yeah.
They're not allowed to sign foreign players from there. They can sign players within the league, within USL, within any, within the United States and Canada. Um, it's I think Vanny made it clear a couple pressers ago that they can still sign players from Canada. They just can't be, you know, from aside from MLS. They can't sign somebody from like the Canadian League or something
Yeah.
like that. As long as they are in MLS, they can still sign Canadian players. But they can't sign any foreign players from Europe, South America, Africa, any other continent in the summer.
Yeah, so what's going on with the supporters now? There's been a sort of big uproar amongst them. How has this been in pre-season and as we creep closer to the start of the year?
Yeah, so again, another part of the sanctions were that Chris Klein, who was president of LA Galaxy, he would be suspended for 6 months from sporting duties. Greg Vanney would take the title of sporting director. He's currently the sporting director of the club. And there was a lot of speculation about what was going to happen with Chris Klein. It was reported that at the end of last season, that was the final year of his contract. So the Galaxy had to make a decision on the future of Chris Klein. And I think Kevin Baxter of the LA Times reported a couple weeks ago that Klein was going to return once his suspension was over with. He would resume duties with the club. When
Mm.
I've gone out to training, I've seen Chris Klein around the grounds. It's not like he's been gone from the organization per se, but
Yeah.
he's still around the grounds, walking around, doing his thing. But he's not allowed to be part of sporting duties or activities such as that. So yeah, because of that, many LA Galaxy fans were surprised when Baxter
Yeah.
reported that Klein's going to be back once the suspension's over, and I guess that really ticked off a lot of fans and supporters. And then I think all of the major supporter groups of the LA Galaxy came out with a joint statement saying that, look, we're going to be empty in the stands. We're not going to be going to LA Galaxy games until, as they say, change is made at the highest level.
Mm.
So essentially, what they're saying is, hey, we want Chris Klein gone, and then we'll return to games. And the first preseason game for the LA Galaxy with people in it at Dignity Health Sports Park was this past weekend. And before the game started, about an hour before, you had LA Galaxy supporters, marching and chanting, saying "Klein out,"
Mm.
signs protesting in front of Legends Plaza, one of the major entrances at Dignity Health Sports Park, and they definitely made their voice clear. You had a maybe good 50, 100 people around between that number
Okay.
going out there to protest. People coming into the stadium as well, the cars honking their horns in like
Mm.
agreement with what they were standing for. And, I know preseason games that, for the LA Galaxy, don't really get much attendance, but, the supporter sections, Victoria Block, LA Right Squad were completely empty. There was nobody there. There was no drums, no chanting. The crowd was still, they still create an atmosphere. They still, react to what's going on, but the support, the chants, drums you usually hear on game days.
Mm.
I mean, even in preseason, they're out there still, singing and chanting for the club, but they weren't out there. I mean, even in the press box, you could hear once the game started, people were chanting Klein out from the outside of the stadium. So it was
Right.
it was that kind of situation there. So right now it's kind of just wait and see what happens now. I know the Galaxy have had a meeting with the supporters groups before to discuss the situation. That was a couple weeks ago. I don't know if they're gonna have another meeting again, but I know that there's been conversations between the supporter groups and the LA Galaxy about this issue. And obviously, we're less than 20 days away from the
Yeah.
first game, which is supposed to be the first big game on Apple TV. This is their marquee game that they've been marketing. The LA Galaxy tweet every like 5 minutes about this game, so they want people to be there and in the stands. But yeah, I think it'll be really interesting to see what happens once the game against
Mm.
LAFC, the Rose Bowl, commences, because there will be supporter sections for each team. And I know LAFC have great support; they have great supporters there. But we'll see what happens with the Galaxy. Will they have the supporters there with drums? I'm sure there'll be people with the get wanting to watch the Galaxy, but will the supporters be there actively wanting to chant, being there, wanting to be there for the team, or are they still going to continue to make the statement? Which I think right now it's just a kind of like a staring contest. Who's gonna
Yeah.
who's gonna move first? Who's gonna be the one that's like, okay, either we'll do something with Klein or we'll go back to the stands. That kind of situation, you know. So only time
Mm.
will tell what will happen. I really don't know what's going to go down, but it's definitely going to be one of these, either the LA Galaxy doing something or the supporters groups moving first in this kind of, staring contest.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see what happens, especially such a big opener. Like the big game is El Trafico to start the season. It's MLS's partnership with Apple kicking off. Is there'll be so many more eyes on what's going on here. So it's going to be really interesting to see if nothing's sort of finalized before kickoff, like how big an impact that could have on the club and the fans. It's going to be very interesting to see. Back to the players then, and to the roster. You mentioned obviously with one of these penalties was the 1 million in GAM fine. That was instantly almost recuperated with Kevin Cabral going over to the Colorado Rapids. Is still paying quite a chunk of his wages, and obviously he was signed for a lot more. But how is this going to help the side in building this roster and changing what's happening up there in the final third?
Yeah, I mean, you open up a DP spot, which is really
Mm.
important. That's kind of the reason you can tell why the Galaxy were really wanting to get rid of Cabral. I mean, they're still paying his wages, like you said. So
Yeah.
they really wanted to get this roster spot open, bring in somebody new, somebody who can be more effective in the final third, because that's really what Kevin Cabral really lacked. He was a good player, great work rate on and off the ball. Could really stretch the field. A lot of the little things, right, that you want a player to do that really helps the team. But just in the final third, his decision making just was not there. It was his finishing, was constantly
Mm.
a problem. I would say, because he would be given many opportunities, just couldn't put it in the back of the net. Um, and for the most part, I think the Galaxy were going to get rid of Kevin Cabral in some capacity. I think it was a kind of great that they were able to get something for him in MLS, be able to recruit that 1 million in the GAM, like you mentioned, from the Colorado Rapids. Um, it'll be like, I think maybe they're going to pay half of that this year and the other half next season. So not necessarily
Okay.
1 million GAM this year, but essentially they're going to still be getting general allocation money and still be able to some way kind of recoup from the penalties that they were given by MLS.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see. And obviously on that, playing with these wingers, Kevin Cabral and Douglas Costa, two DPs. There's been rumors circling around with Douglas Costa as well. Is he's still on the squad at the moment? Does it seem like he's still going to be here for the 2023 season?
I think right now with the current situation, the Galaxy are going to keep him, but early in January, Costa was seen in Brazil talking to executives of Flamengo, of Grêmio, two big clubs in Brazil. He used to play for Grêmio before coming to the LA
Mm.
Galaxy. In fact, he got his footballing career started in Grêmio, so he has some connections there. He has some problems with the fan base in Grêmio, and I know
Mm.
that was one of the major reasons that Grêmio were kind of hesitant in signing Costa, because the Galaxy can still buy out one player, and Costa only has 1 year of his guaranteed deal, which is this upcoming season. So essentially, they would be paying 5 million to have Costa off their roster. And I think if Costa was able to get a deal with one of the Brazilian clubs, he'd be there and sign with them easily. But we saw that didn't happen. There were a lot of reports that Grêmio were really considering this. I think the coach of Grêmio even mentioned that he scheduled a meeting with the president of the club, and they were really talks forward that could maybe push this to really become a reality. But I think things broke down. Greg Vanny talked about in one of his first pressers of the year that the club was aware that Costa was doing this. He was
Mm.
okay with it because, as he said, if a player doesn't want to be here, they don't have to be here. We can find a solution for them. But Costa couldn't find any suitors for him, and he returned to the Galaxy. I think right now with the current situation, he's not really like a winger like the Bayern, Juventus, Douglas Costa player that he
Mm.
was, but he's still a player who fits the role that Manny wants to play in. And I think that's a reason I think the Galaxy may be lucky that he couldn't strike a deal with anybody, because if they were without Costa, they'd have no wingers on this team at all.
No, and I guess that's something we'll go on to later about this system of what's been used and things like that. But you mentioned there the DP spot was opened up with Kevin Cabral leaving. Douglas Costa, if they bought him out, you'd have two DP spots to use. But we're now at the 7th of February now, and no DP signing has been made. so far. Only two players have come in, Memo Rodriguez and Chris Mavinga, who a midfielder and a defender. Is this a little bit of a concern? What with the fact that that you can't sign anyone from abroad in the summer? If you're going to bring in a DP, it needs to be now.
Yeah, and I think I think I didn't mention this earlier, but it doesn't help that Samuel Grandsir had a surprise transfer back to France. I
Mm,
think Greg Vanny talked about there was some issues, personal issues with Grandsir with his family back in France that were kind of telling him, pulling on him to maybe stay back in Europe. From
yeah,
LA to Europe is so far, and being far
yeah.
away from your family. I understand the situations that Grandsir was thinking about. He would go to a second division team in France. He transferred over there. I forgot the name of the team, but they're currently the league leaders in League Two.
Yeah,
But yeah,
Le
that was
Havre.
Le Havre. Yeah,
Yeah.
they were. But that was something the Galaxy weren't expecting. I think, from what I'm hearing from Greg and how he's talked about this transfer, he wanted Grandsir to stay on the team, and
Mm,
he really showed some good promise and really, really good play towards the end of the year and in the MLS Cup playoffs. He had that assist to Julian Araujo, had that goal against LAFC in their last game of the playoffs. Like he really turned it on towards the final stretch of the year, and I think there was some really good potential in what Grandsir showed
mm,
there, especially with Kevin Cabral not being on the roster. Grandsir would be a guaranteed start on this team essentially, but this situation had to come up, and
yeah.
it's really, I think, shell shocked the Galaxy in some way, because now they have to continue to look for another winger after releasing Kevin Cabral. And you mentioned the two signings earlier, Rodriguez and Mavinga. They're really good signings for their depth. But they're not going to be players, I think, who are going to push the Galaxy into becoming an MLS Cup contender. No disrespect to them, but they're just not in a position of need that the Galaxy need to strengthen in. And like we mentioned, we're already in the 7th of February, right? Like the season is so fast approaching. You need to
Mm,
bring in a player now, because uh, we know how busy this MLS season can be. We're going to have the Leagues Cup as well, the US Open Cup, the Gold Cup as well. I think the Galaxy will have some players that will go into the Gold Cup, so they really need some depth at positions. And right now, a lot of the fan base is worried about the current roster. This team doesn't look scary, and if I can say that, I
mm,
don't think there's really anybody aside from maybe Chicharito and Ricky Puig that you can say like, oh yeah, this team is going to be able to compete for MLS Cup and the multiple competitions it's in. But right now, there's nothing there, and there's rumors that Tyler Boyd may be on his way to the LA Galaxy. That'd be a really good depth piece signing. I think he's got some qualities and good depth, but he's not the type of player I think that's gonna change the Galaxy, move them from
mm.
a good team to a great team.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, it's one of these signings you make, Chris Mavinga. You mentioned there like a good centre back. He had a very coming from Toronto, had some very difficult times defensively last season, as did the LA Galaxy. So it doesn't seem like he's one of these statement signings that's going to say this will shore up our defense, unlike what Gaston Brugman was in the midfield.
Mm-hmm.
Like his bringing him in the really solidified those sort of the center of midfield there, and yeah, really gave you something to push on for. The Galaxy looked a lot
Mm-hmm.
stronger there, but Derek Williams has gone obviously to DC United. The boy, I believe I said that right. I always mix that up. Has gone to Nashville. So
Yeah.
two centre backs gone, and Mavinga's come in. I mean, it sort of suggests that he's going to play a relatively large role in this
Yeah.
season.
I think to add to the center back conversation, Greg Vanny's been really high on this kid, Jalen Neal. He's this 19-year-old
Mm,
prospect the Galaxy have, brought up from their academy. He's really highly touted in the US system. He's been with the US youth national teams. He won the US the CONCACAF under 20 championship last year with the US. He was a key contributor in that. He was recently called up to the US men's national team for this
yeah.
January camp, played in both games. Both look excellent. And Greg Vanny is, pride his composure. Being 19, he looks very mature on the pitch. This past game against New York, he was constantly, giving instructions to the veterans. You have a
Yeah.
19-year-old giving Martin Cáceres, a guy who's played in some of the biggest games in the world, in the World Cup, in the Champions League. He's telling him, giving him instructions. Like this kid is very mature for his age. He's really good on the ball, which is something that Vanny really likes, because that's
Mm,
how he wants center backs to play on the system. We know that Greg Vanny is a possession-based coach, and I think Jalen Neal is able to play some really good balls and is really good with the ball at his feet. Not the type of kid to crumble under pressure. So I think right now that's a player to watch in this upcoming year. Greg Vandy's talked about how he's going to play a bigger role, how he wants to get him more involved in the first team,
mm.
give him some more first team minutes, be the depth especially with all the competitions we mentioned the Galaxy are going to be playing in. Like
Yeah.
he'll be somebody who's going to get minutes and somebody that I think a lot of people are really excited to watch about because we haven't really seen since maybe Julian Araujo and Efrain Alvarez a player rise up through the academy ranks.
Yeah.
And I think Jalen Neal is that next person to do so and be able to solidify themselves, within MLS and be a starter in this team. I think he's got great potential to be something great in this league. And, as we said, he's definitely a kid who's mature above his years.
Excellent. Yeah, it'd be good to see. I mean, he was getting his US men's national team first start before an MLS starts.
Yeah.
Interesting way to start your sort of senior career. But we spoke about the wingers, obviously, Granciera and Cabral leaving, and Greg Vanney sort of flirted with the use of like a wing backs and three at the back. In pre-season so far, have you seen any suggestion that could be an option for him going forward into this new season with less options on the wing? And also, does that get Joveljic on the pitch a bit more?
Yeah, I think, when you see the current roster of the LA Galaxy, I think playing with the wing backs is essentially what fits best. I think that's what works. And we saw Greg Vanney use it against New York City. He started out in a 3-5-2. He had Raheem Edwards on the left. And, Julian Araujo, they're still kind of up in the air of where his rights are. Do Barcelona still kind of have something up in there? I think Vanney touched up on his post-game press conference saying, they haven't really gotten anything official from FIFA or Barcelona. So they're still kind of in a limbo on can he play for the Galaxy or what's going on here. But with that being said, he had Daniel Aguirre, who's usually a midfielder, play as a right wing back. So we saw Greg, utilize that system, Chicharito and Joveljic up top, and you had that midfield trio of Push, Brigman, and Delgado up there. But as Vanney described it about post game, he said the team looked very disjointed, and they really did. He mentioned that this wasn't necessarily how they wanted to play, but more of like, hey, we want to get people minutes, we want to get people back into match sharpness, be able to build some of that connection and rhythm that's needed once the season starts. So I wouldn't really put too much into it, but it was very interesting to see Greg kind of try this out because we know the fans have been asking for Joveljic to get more minutes. I think we know Raheem Edwards and Julian Araujo would really exceed as wingbacks with how they play, how they're very offensively oriented. The team has no wingers, so it makes sense to kind of play in this system. You have, like we mentioned, Jalen Neal, somebody who can play more minutes, be that depth at center back, and really start to develop in these next couple of years. But I think Greg Vanney's still comfortable with that 4-3-3, and we saw him switch to that in the second half of the game. We saw a straight up 4-3-3 with Douglas Costa at right, Memo Rodriguez kind of filling in as a winger out on that left wing. He would get an assist to Chicharito that put the game 1-1, but eventually the Galaxy would lose 2-1 to New York. They had a chance to actually tie the game. There's a late penalty. Efrain Alvarez was brought down in the box, but Douglas Costa's penalty was saved. So, the penalty issues are still up in the air for the LA Galaxy. We haven't really crossed that bridge yet. But yeah, I think for Joveljic to get more minutes, I think he'll have to remain a sub because the Galaxy just don't really fit in a 3-5-2. They just look way more comfortable in 4-3-3. And I think it's a much simpler game for them like that. Considering, if you're playing with two strikers up top, somebody has to not be as high. Somebody has to get lower. Somebody has to come deeper into the pitch. And I think it's just a much more simpler system to play a 4-3-3 than it is to play a 3-5-2.
Is there a little bit of a concern then the way that this roster's being built, where when you look at it on paper, that it's you haven't got the wingers anymore. You've got these attacking wing backs that could comfortably suit it. Yet the team doesn't look good when they play in this system. Greg Vanney wants to use a 4-3-3, but doesn't have the players for it. There seems to be a real sort of like a concern about where how the back office is planning really for anything to do with this side. There just seems to be a lot of misjudged decisions. Is that fair to say, do you think, on this side?
I'd say so. I think right now it's kind of just a waiting game to see what happens. I mean, we know we talked about the Julian Araujo to Barcelona thing. They're still waiting to kind of figure out if he's still an LA Galaxy. Does he still count as an LA Galaxy player? The kind of things that happen in the transfer window that are very complicated and things you kind of need to understand before you play Julian Araujo. And then again, we have to wait to see who this new DP is going to be because that spot is still open. I think everybody's assuming he's going to be a winger. I think that's kind of the best situation for the Galaxy, get another winger there. But yeah, right now I'd say it's just kind of using what you have right now. And I think Vanney's, we saw success in that 4-3-3, and I think it really, really plays to the strengths of this team, which is that midfield. So right now we kind of just need to wait and how this team is set up. I think once the transfer window closes in MLS, which is in April, we can really say like, okay, I think the Galaxy can play up to here, or maybe they're a team that might not make the playoffs. But if right now, if you were to ask me where the Galaxy would finish, I would just throw a dart from 1 to 15, see where it lands, and I could talk myself into the Galaxy landing there.
Okay, yeah, it seems there's so much, yeah, so much unknown with them, and the fact that they're leaving so much so late, it seems, is going to be going to keep people guessing. As we even when we kick this off, obviously the one player they brought in last summer, Ricky Pooch, is a huge part of this team. The way it's going to where the team's going to go forward and create opportunities. And from what you saw of him in that sort of second half of last season and how the team are preparing this year, could we see him becoming like an MLS MVP candidate this year, do you think?
Yeah, I think he's definitely got everything needed to become an MLS MVP contender. Right now, kind of just depends on the rest of the roster. I mean, we know that the Galaxy really, excuse me, succeeded in the 4-3-3, and the wingers, Costa and Cabral at the time, really stretched out the field, kind of made it a lot easier for Ricky to operate in the middle. But without that, you're kind of having a more congested midfield because opponents know, hey, they can't really stretch the field as much, and thus you're kind of getting a limited role in how much Ricky Puig can touch the ball, how much he can progress with the ball. So it really depends on the roster. Can the Galaxy get a winger that stretches the field, that can, is quick, that can get touches into the final third? Because that's what Cabral excelled in, getting touches in the final third, stretching out that back line. And, we know defenses, they have to spread out. The midfield has to spread out of the opponent. And that's kind of where Ricky excelled, kind of exploiting those spaces, getting into the pockets and, being able to assist or score. We saw that goal against Toronto. That was purely just combination play. Having Cabral out wide to spread out the defenders. That's really what helped Ricky Puig succeed. And I think right now, for Ricky Puig to be an MVP candidate, the Galaxy need to get some really good wingers, because that's what really opens up the midfield for Ricky to be the creative outlet that he is, and also get the space enough to shoot. I mean, we saw the goal against Toronto, like I mentioned, it was kind of from outside the box, so he has that in his locker. So it really just depends on how the Galaxy build out this roster. Does a player that comes in, does he fit with Puig? Can he be a player that plays off the shoulder of the fullback? Can he? Because we know Puig can play any ball, capable. He's really, really talented. You see the Barcelona teachings in him when you watch him play. The short passes, the moving off the ball, everything like that. It just depends on, can the Galaxy get a player out wide that can complement that, and can Chicharito just continue to be finishing? And I think the striker situation, no matter if it's Chicharito or Joveljic, there'll be somebody putting up goals up to up.
Yeah, definitely. And as long as he stays happy and not too bored in LA, as those stories are going around, I'm sure. Yeah, if you can add those quick players that can really move defenses around, it brings so much for him. Which, yeah, I see what you're saying there with the fact that if you bring in these sort of the wing backs and two center forwards rather than that, the opposition gets more congested in the middle, and you may not get the best out of him.
And I think that kind of puts more pressure on the Galaxy defense, because you're so susceptible to counterattacks in that situation. So I think that's why I'm saying, playing 3-5-2. I understand, people want Joveljic and Chicharito to start up front, but when you look at it tactically and systemically, it just doesn't really help the Galaxy.
So we're kicking off the season with El Trafico, as we've mentioned, from a fan's sort of point of view earlier on in this episode. But on the pitch, both sides really with plenty to do. LAFC have been brought in Aaron Long, but obviously Chicha's now left. They need a new striker. They seem to only have 3 midfielders, so there's still not so much to really gauge on their side in some ways, because there's still going to be so much for them to do. But on the same point of view, covering LA Galaxy, there's still the thoughts of, well, we need this. They need to get a winger. What do you feel that the Galaxy can go into this game quite confident in what they've got at the moment, and what they're going to be going for in the future? And looking at this LAFC side, obviously knocked them out in the playoffs and went on to win the double last year. How's this gonna start for the teams on the pitch, do you think, kicking off the season?
Yeah, it's so interesting to get in El Tráfico right at the first game of the year. I
Yeah.
mean, we all know that at the beginning of the season, not everybody's, very sharp. Some games can be kind of sloppy. So it might be interesting to see kind of how both teams come out. I think, as
Mm.
you mentioned, there's definitely a lot of roster questions for both teams. And I think that's kind of, plays in the Galaxy's favor because from an LA Galaxy fan perspective, like from what I've seen and heard of, fans talking to me and looking on Twitter, like they're worried about the roster. They don't think this roster is good enough to compete. They think there's so many holes that, it's going to be a long season. But I mean, from the LAFC side, if you really look at it, I mean, they have plenty of holes and questions as well.
Mm.
So you're kind of even in that department. And I think kind of just depends on, who can adjust better. And I think with the Galaxy potentially bringing in the signing, maybe LAFC brings somebody in else as well. It could really turn the tables of how the game ends up. But nonetheless, I think it'll be an interesting spectacle getting to be at the Rose Bowl, potentially, breaking the MLS attendance record at that game. And I think, both teams are very popular in the city of Los Angeles. So
Mm.
there's going to be no questions about attendance. But as we mentioned earlier, the supporter boycott might change that.
Yeah, definitely. It's going to be exciting to see from sort of a neutral's point of view as much as it will for you and your colleagues covering the two teams. But yeah, just under not too long to go now. It must be quite exciting to be able to get back and covering those sort of MLS games and those competitive matches once again.
Yeah, I think it's definitely really fun. I'm still learning my way to, become a better reporter. And I think, this upcoming season is going to be a great experience to learn and really get to write the stories of this LA Galaxy team. Because like I said, I think at the beginning, this would be a great team to have like as a documentary on like Apple TV
Yeah.
and kind of see what goes on with this team. It's such an interesting story to see what if this team's going to bounce back from, losing to the rivals, seeing them, win MLS
Mm.
Cup. We saw the potential in this team that could win MLS Cup. Will that be back again? I mean, what happens with Douglas Costa? I mean, Jalen Neal, I talked about him. Will we see his rise,
Mm.
to become a solid player this year? And I think just overall, just how this team has been built the last couple of years with Greg Vanney slowly building something. I think this has to be the year where you really go all out and compete. But at the moment, it just doesn't seem like that with the current roster.
Yeah, very going to be very interesting to see. Alex, thank you so much for joining me, and have a great season ahead covering the team. And hopefully we can chat again once the games all kick off and we get a bit more of an idea of what's going to be happening on the pitch.
For sure, it's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thanks, Alex.